Industry. Stephen, really nice to see you. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, how popular he remains 40 years on?
I mean, he appeals to different generations, and he had such a strong and series of iconic ways of presenting himself. You know, you had the 1950s kind of teenager Elvis who shook his hips and came up through doing Hound Dog and mixing, really bringing black music, black rock and roll, which was created by there, into the mainstream. And then you move on to the sort of, you know, cheesy, slightly 1960s movie Elvis, you know, who acted in lots of fairly bad films. Don't kill me for saying that, Elvis fans, and a couple of good ones. But then he sort of reinvented himself back as a, you know, as a rocker in the late 60s, and then of course you had that kind of Las Vegas Elvis in the 70s. And each time, so he was kind of reinventing himself, you know, in the way that other stars have learnt to do since. And he appealed to different generations.
Do you remember where you were when you heard he died?
Yeah, well, I was roadieing at the time for punk bands in the late 70s. I was like a teenage roadie. And yeah, I've been on the road with a couple of bands, and I remember talking to Billy Idol, who was the lead singer of Generation X, which was a punk band at the time, and he of course had adopted Elvis's kind of stage persona a little bit, and that kind of rebel persona with the sneer. And you know, a lot of people went on to kind of adopt little bits of Elvis into their own kind of performances. I mean, you could even say that Justin Bieber has got a little bit of Elvis in him, you know?
Absolutely, because as you say, over time, people have sort of mimicked, copied, probably not even realizing they were doing it, but because he was so iconic and so unique in his style.
Very much so, very much so. And, you know, he's got an appeal and an imagery that still appeals to people to this day, and it's an incredible legacy that he's left behind him. He had 70 albums that he released, over 120 singles during his lifetime. But of course, he never came to the UK to perform, so audiences here never got to see him live. You would have had to have gone to Las Vegas to really see him in his prime. And
you've got actually the newspaper article, don't you, of when he...
I thought it would be a little bit cheesy to bring this along, but I thought, hey, it's
it's Elvis, it's great.
So this has been hanging on my wall since 1977. I remember getting this the next morning and keeping it, and I found it in a drawer at my mother's house, and I'd kept it all these years. But yeah, that was 40 years ago. My God, you know.
You're still in the music industry. I mean,
I am.
Just briefly, has there been anyone like him since?
There's not been anybody like Elvis, but there's been people who've had as big an effect. Time will tell whether the likes of Ed Sheeran will be as popular in 40 years' time. But I suspect there are certain artists who can extend the life of their career for so long. But of course, remember, those artists who were cut down in their prime, like Elvis was, way before his time, he was only 42,
Indeed.
Tend to have a sort of historic quality about them, rather than those who live on and on.
Indeed, and his music lives on as well. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.